Colonel James Mitchell had seen many ceremonies in his 25 years of military service, but nothing quite prepared him for this moment. Standing in the grand hall of Buckingham Palace, surrounded by centuries of tradition and protocol, he felt the weight of history pressing down on his shoulders. The ornate chandeliers cast a golden glow across the marble floors, where dozens of perfectly polished boots stood in formation. The American officer had been specially invited to witness the changing of the guard ceremony as part of a diplomatic exchange program. His presence here was meant to strengthen the bonds between the United States and the United Kingdom, two nations that had stood together through countless challenges. However, what started as a routine diplomatic visit was about to become something far more significant. As Colonel Mitchell served the royal guards in their iconic red tunics and towering bearskin hats, he couldn't help but admire their discipline and precision. These weren't just ceremonial soldiers playing dress-up for tourists. These were elite warriors, each one a highly trained member of the British Army's most prestigious regiments. Their movements were sharp, their bearing impeccable, and their dedication to duty unwavering. The ceremony had been proceeding flawlessly, when suddenly, chaos erupted outside the palace walls. The sound of shouting crowds and police sirens began to filter through the ancient stone walls. Security radios crackled with urgent messages that made the palace officials exchange worried glances. Something was happening in the streets of London. It was escalating quickly. Within minutes, a senior British official rushed into the ceremonial hall, his face pale with concern. He whispered urgently to the guard commander, gesturing toward the windows where the distant sounds of unrest were growing louder. The situation outside was deteriorating rapidly. Difficult decisions needed to be made. Colonel Mitchell watched as the British officials huddled together, their voices tense and low. He had been in enough combat situations to recognize the signs of a crisis unfolding. His military instincts kicked in, and he began assessing the situation with the cool, analytical mind that had served him well in Afghanistan and Iraq. Whatever was happening outside these palace walls, it was serious enough to disrupt one of Britain's most sacred traditions. The news that reached the palace officials was gravely concerning. A terrorist attack had been thwarted just blocks away from Buckingham Palace, but intelligence suggested that additional threats were still active in the area. The Metropolitan Police had cordoned off several streets, and security forces were conducting urgent sweeps of nearby buildings. The safety of everyone in the palace, including the royal family, was now at risk. Colonel Mitchell listened as the British officials debated their options in hushed, urgent tones. The traditional protocol demanded that the royal guard maintain their posts no matter what external circumstances arose. For over 3 centuries, these guards had stood their ground through wars, bombings, and countless other threats. Their unwavering presence was a symbol of British resilience and the unshakable stability of the monarchy. However, the current situation was unlike anything they had faced in recent memory. Intelligence reports indicated that the palace itself might be a target, and the ceremonial guards, while highly trained soldiers, were positioned in exposed areas that made them vulnerable to attack. The beautiful red tunics and tall bearskin hats that made them instantly recognizable also made them perfect targets for anyone seeking to strike at the heart of British tradition. The guard commander, a stern man with decades of military experience, stood rigid as he received his orders. His face showed no emotion, but Colonel Mitchell could see the conflict in the man's eyes. These guards were not just following orders. They were upholding a sacred trust that had been passed down through generations. To abandon their posts, even in the face of danger, went against everything they had sworn to protect and defend. As the officials continued their heated discussion, Colonel Mitchell found himself thinking about his own soldiers back in the States. He remembered the difficult decisions he had made in combat zones, the impossible choices between following protocol and adapting to rapidly changing threats. Sometimes, true courage meant knowing when to break with tradition in order to serve a greater good. The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Outside, the sounds of sirens and helicopter rotors filled the air. Security personnel moved with increasing urgency through the palace corridors, their radios crackling with constant updates from the field. Every minute that passed without a decision was a minute that could prove costly for everyone involved. The moment that would change everything came when Colonel Mitchell stepped forward and spoke with quiet authority. His voice cut through the anxious chatter of the British officials. Carrying the confidence of a man who had made life-and-death decisions under pressure countless times before, the room fell silent as all eyes turned to the American officer who had no official authority in this situation, but whose experience commanded respect. "Gentlemen," Colonel Mitchell said, his voice steady and calm despite the chaos around them, "I've been in situations like this before, and I can tell you that pride and tradition mean nothing. If good people die because we were too stubborn to adapt, his words hung in the air like a challenge to everything. The British officials had been taught about duty and protocol, he continued. These guards are soldiers first, ceremonial figures second. Right now, their lives are more valuable than any tradition, no matter how sacred it might be. If the intelligence reports are accurate, keeping them in those exposed positions isn't brave. It's reckless." The colonel's combat experience gave weight to his words that no amount of diplomatic training could match. The British officials exchanged uncomfortable glances. They had spent their entire careers following established protocols and maintaining the delicate balance between security and tradition. The idea of an American officer suggesting they abandoned centuries of precedent was both shocking and, in some ways, liberating. Here was someone with no emotional attachment to their traditions offering a clear, tactical assessment of the situation. Colonel Mitchell pressed on, in Iraq. "I learned that the enemy doesn't care about your ceremonies or your pride. They care about creating maximum impact with minimal effort. Those guards standing in perfect formation outside are exactly the kind of symbolic target that terrorists dream about. You want to honor their service? Get them to safety and let them fight another day." The guard commander, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. His voice was barely above a whisper, but his words carried the weight of generations of military tradition. "Sir," he said, addressing Colonel Mitchell directly, "what you're suggesting goes against everything we've sworn to uphold. These positions have been maintained through the Blitz, through IRA bombings, through every threat this nation has faced. To abandon them now..." His voice trailed off, the internal struggle visible on his weathered face. Colonel Mitchell looked directly into the guard commander's eyes, recognizing the profound struggle the man was facing. This wasn't just about military tactics or security protocols. It was about identity, heritage, and the soul of an institution that had stood as a symbol of British strength for centuries. The American officer chose his next words carefully, knowing they could either bridge the gap between two military cultures or create an insurmountable divide. "Commander," Colonel Mitchell said with deep respect in his voice, "I'm not asking you to abandon your traditions. I'm asking you to honor the most important tradition of all, bringing your soldiers home alive. Those guards out there didn't join the military to die as symbols. They joined to serve their queen and their country. Right now, the best way they can serve is by staying alive to fight the real battles ahead." The room remained silent as everyone processed the colonel's words. Through the tall windows, they could see the royal guards maintaining their perfect formations despite the chaos erupting around them. These men were willing to die for their duty, but was it right to ask them to do so when their deaths would serve no tactical purpose beyond maintaining appearances? Suddenly, a new voice entered the conversation. The Queen's private secretary, a man whose opinion carried enormous weight in matters of protocol, stepped forward. He had been observing the debate from the corner of the room, his expression thoughtful and grave. "Colonel Mitchell," he said, "your perspective is... refreshing. We often become so focused on maintaining tradition that we forget why those traditions existed in the first place." The private secretary continued. "The Royal Guard was created to protect the monarchy and ensure the continuity of our institutions. If maintaining the ceremonial aspects of their duty puts them in unnecessary danger, then we're failing in our primary obligation to them as their commanders." His words carried the authority of someone who spoke not just for the palace administration, but for the crown itself. Colonel Mitchell felt a surge of hope as he saw the British officials beginning to understand his point of view. This wasn't about American military doctrine versus British tradition. It was about common sense and the fundamental responsibility that all leaders have to protect the people under their command. The terrorist threat outside was real and immediate, while the ceremonial guard duty, though symbolically important, could be suspended temporarily without compromising the security of the realm. The guard commander took a deep breath, and when he spoke again, his voice carried a new resolve. "Colonel Mitchell," he said, straightening his shoulders, "you're asking me to make a decision that goes against 300 years of precedent? But you're also asking me to put the lives of my men above ceremony and protocol." He paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected centuries of British military tradition. And you're absolutely right. The transformation in the room was immediate and electric. The British officials who had been paralyzed by the weight of tradition suddenly sprang into action with the efficiency that had made the British military legendary. Orders were issued with crisp precision, and within minutes, the complex machinery of Palace, security began implementing a plan that would have been unthinkable just an hour earlier. Colonel Mitchell watched with professional admiration as the guard commander took control of the situation. The man's internal struggle had been resolved, and now he moved with the confidence of a leader who had chosen pragmatism over protocol. "All ceremonial guards are to withdraw to secure positions immediately," the commander ordered into his radio. "This is not a retreat. This is a tactical repositioning to better serve our protective duties." The response from the guards themselves was remarkable. These highly disciplined soldiers, who had been trained never to abandon their posts under any circumstances, responded to their commander's orders without hesitation. Their trust in their leadership was absolute. And if their commander believed this was the right course of action, then they would follow without question. Within 15 minutes, every exposed ceremonial position around the palace had been evacuated. As the guards moved to their new positions, Colonel Mitchell felt a profound sense of satisfaction. This wasn't about proving that American military doctrine was superior to British tradition. It was about demonstrating that true strength comes, the ability to adapt when circumstances demanded. The British had shown that their greatest tradition wasn't rigid adherence to ceremony, but rather the wisdom to evolve when necessary. The Queen's private secretary approached Colonel Mitchell with an expression of gratitude and respect. "Colonel," he said quietly, "what you did here today took considerable courage. It would have been easier for you to remain silent and let us handle this according to our own protocols. Instead, you risked diplomatic relations to speak what you believed was the truth. That kind of moral courage is rare in any military, in any nation." The wisdom of Colonel Mitchell's intervention became clear within hours. Intelligence reports confirmed that the terrorist cell had indeed been planning a coordinated attack on the ceremonial guards, hoping to create a devastating blow to British morale by targeting one of the nation's most beloved traditions. The exposed positions that the guards had maintained for centuries would have made them perfect targets for the assault that was being planned by the time the all-clear was given. Every person in that ornate palace hall understood that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just the prevention of a potential tragedy, but a moment when two military cultures had come together in the best possible way. The American colonel had offered his perspective without arrogance or condescension, while the British officials had shown the flexibility and wisdom to listen to advice that challenged their most fundamental assumptions. The guard commander later approached Colonel Mitchell with a level of respect that transcended national boundaries. "Sir," he said, extending his hand, "today you proved that true allies don't just stand together in battle. They're willing to challenge each other when lives are at stake. You saved the lives of my men, and I'll never forget that." The handshake between the two officers represented more than personal gratitude. It was a symbol of the trust and mutual respect that had developed between their forces. In the days that followed, the story of the American officer who convinced the Royal Guard to temporarily abandon their posts spread throughout both military communities. Some traditionalists criticized the decision, arguing that giving in to terrorist threats only encouraged more attacks. However, the overwhelming response from both British and American military personnel was one of admiration for the courage it took to prioritize lives over ceremony. Colonel Mitchell returned to the united states with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be an ally. He had learned that true partnership sometimes requires difficult conversations and the willingness to challenge even sacred traditions when circumstances demand it. His experience at Buckingham Palace would influence his leadership style for the rest of his career, reminding him that flexibility and adaptation are often the greatest. Weapons in any military arsenal. The royal guards returned to their ceremonial duties the following week, once the security threat had been completely eliminated. However, new protocols were established that allowed for rapid tactical repositioning when intelligence indicated potential threats. The tradition continued, but it had evolved to meet the realities of modern security challenges. Colonel Mitchell's intervention had not destroyed a centuries-old tradition. It had helped it survive and adapt for future generations, proving that sometimes the greatest respect for tradition comes from knowing when and how to change it.